Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
Hello, I'm Glen Cerny, General Manager of KRWG, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming you to our program here for the 10th year. We've had a decade of Your Legislators, and it's our opportunity to ask our elected representatives in Santa Fe to explain what they're doing, what their thoughts, and what some of the progress may be during the legislators. And on this program, I'm pleased to welcome Representative Doreen Gallegos. Welcome to Your Legislators.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Everything I do now is a decade tradition, all right? So let's start with the question of, can you explain what your district covers, where you are located?
Yes. I cover Las Alturas, the Talavera area, half of the university. I go down south and I hit Vado, Berrino, and I end in Anthony.
You know, I have been covering the legislative sessions now this is my 10th year, and everyone has told me, forget trying to figure it out, you're never going to do it. But you've got some time up there now. With the experience you've gained, how does that begin to mesh what you would hope to do as a representative representing this area?
Well, you know, part of it was getting to know what the process was. And I think just that in itself was really challenging. And so once I understood the process and how to get a bill from A to Z, I feel now that I'm just much more effective. And so now I'm even, you know, I get more prepared because I know, okay, I need to talk to certain people to make sure that once I get that bill and I drop it, I'm ready to go.
Just getting around the roundhouse sometimes can be confusing.
Well, you know, it's a roundhouse, and sometimes where you start, and you don't
But there's
realize
that one goofy little break in the roundhouse that always confuses me. Well, let's talk about some initiatives and issues that you're looking to push forward before we talk about some of the general things that are likely to be discussed.
You know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I've been a child advocate for about 20 years. I'm a social worker by trade, and so the whole reason I even got into politics is because I wanted to bring a larger form of advocacy to those who can't advocate for themselves. And so for me, children's issues, the elderly, people that are disabled, those are real high priorities for me. So I'm always really looking to see how I can work legislation in that is going to help that type of population.
And it is such a vulnerable group. I've had the opportunity to work with our Dean de los Niños here in Las Cruces. It provides such an important service. So it's a wide kind of topic. Are there any particular bills or points that you're going to be looking for? Actually,
one of the pieces of legislation, actually two of my bills that I've already are working on dropping, one is for Shaken Baby, and it's really to provide new parents with education as soon as that baby's born, and then it goes on to, it'll do a check with them 6 months later. But this is just such a cool program because it's got an actual doll that if you shake the doll, it shows where in the brain that it affects it. And so I think it's such a visual, and so many people learn in different ways. You know, you can tell people information, they can read information, and then now an actual visual. And so I think that'll help people when they do get frustrated and those, you know, tensions are high being a new parent or having a chronic, you know, crying baby, that may say, okay, wait a minute, I need to take a step back, and I have a phone number to call, I have training, and maybe I can, you know, I'll take a breather. So I'm hoping that helps with that area. I'm also looking at a bill that helps child protective workers who are in the field. I want to make sure they're safe because they're covering and making sure kids are safe, but in order for us to make sure kids are safe, we have to make sure they're safe. And so part of my legislation is to make it at least a felony that if you attack a CYFD worker that is going out and performing a duty that we've asked them to do as the state, we want to make sure that they're safe as well and that they can go home to their families.
You're talking about children, and children's services gives us an outstanding opportunity to immediately walk over to education. And let's start with pre-K education, which again is that very vulnerable point of beginning to learn and setting the stage for future learning.
Well, you know, I think that that's where the early beginning, that's where it all starts. You know, if we don't capture those kids at that pre-K level and early pre-K, you know, that's when that brain is developing, and it's so important that we work and put funding and money into that area, because what we put in there, we're going to have payoff later.
Well, and that also goes back to what you were talking about with parents. I mean, the parent participation in that early education is so pivotal to any success.
You nailed it. You said you said it better than I did, but you nailed it. You know, I really believe that that's where we have to put so much of our resources. And so many times, you know, I know that resources are really limited. I sit on House Appropriations, and so, you know, we have to look at the budgets, and that's the hardest part of what I go and do in Santa Fe, because I really see so many worthy causes and worthy bills and just different things that we should be funding as a state. And sometimes we just have to say, we only have this much money, so where are we going to put those resources? And then we don't want to underfund something. You know, I think sometimes we try to fund a little bit of everything, but then are we really doing the program, you know, justice? And that's a big concern that I have, because I don't want to underfund and then we leave people with partial services.
I think one of the most talked about issues in New Mexico right now, and as someone that has to fly out of El Paso with some regularity, identification cards, driver's license. Do you see an end to the conversation and finally getting a plan put through?
I hope so. You know, I know that last year the Senate put together a bill that really, it didn't make everybody happy, and I think especially the governor, and so I think that that's why we couldn't get it through the House. It's a two-tiered system, and basically what it says is that, you know, we're gonna give driver's license, and we're gonna have, it's not gonna be a form of ID. If you're not a citizen, then you can't get on a plane. You know, so we're not giving permission and giving people just, you know, access to go. But we don't want people living in the shadows. I think as New Mexicans and as New Mexico, we really have a really different climate here, and we need to look at how our culture and geographically how we play into that. And you know, the way New Mexico is set up, we have our families, and people cross that border on a daily basis sometimes. And we don't want to separate families. We don't want to hurt families. And so we have to look at ways to do that. But we're talking about generations of people that have been going, you know, across the border. And that's just the way that we've been doing business for a long time. And I agree that, you know, if there's people that are committing crimes here, we don't want that type of population here. But there's so many times that we've got grandma maybe in Mexico and kids over here. Do we want to stop that process? You know, I don't want a mother not to be able to take her child to the doctor. I don't want people living in the shadows. What the real issue is it's immigration. And we need to do some immigration reform. And I know that that's a big process, but I think if we got that under control, then the driver's license issue wouldn't be such a big deal. I know we do need to fix it though, because we need to become, you know, there's a federal mandate.
Yeah,
and
there's
so
a compliancy issue. And I want to clarify that
Yeah.
at this point, the issue is not flying. It's getting into some of the federal
Right.
laboratories that it's been an immediate issue, but something that still needs to be, you know, the session ended last year on a lot of finger pointing that, well, this was added late, we didn't have time, we dragged feet. Does the running start help that this time?
Well, I think that we've got to look at what really happened last time. Is, you know, there was a switch in powers. You know, for over 60, 70 years, the Democrats had been in power. And we had, you know, a system of running things where when the Republicans took over the House, especially, there was that switch of power. And so there was a different way of doing things and a slower way. And I think that they did things differently. People weren't used to that, whether it was on either side. And so it was a different process. I think that I'm hoping that some of that will be cleared up this year. I'm hoping that it's a 30-day session, which means it's a money session. And, you know, we really have to stay focused, because you know, the budget is what we should be focusing on. And I know that everybody, you know, I've gotten calls for all kinds of things, and I say that sounds like a great issue that we need to work on. But for this session, don't even think that that's going to come up, because unless there's a message from the governor, it's all budget.
Well, and you talk about budget, and one of the issues that we're all trying to figure out right now is with the drop in oil prices that the revenues are, it's great when you and I fill up at a gas pump to drive to Santa Fe, but when it comes down to parsing what kind of tax revenue we have, it truly is an issue and inhibiting our ability to make progress.
You know, I pulled that today because I knew that was going to be one of our questions. And you know, today we're paying $35 on a barrel. When the projections went out, we were doing over 45. And so when we look at projections, and we had already started to craft the budget, we were really looking at different numbers. And so I want people to really understand that that's where some of the panic is starting to happen, because when we've projected our budgets to be at a certain level, and we've already said, okay, well, certain agencies need this much money, you know, the cost of Medicaid is going to take this much money, we're not looking at a lot of new money coming in.
Yeah.
And so, and even one more step from that is, when we're not looking at new money, what are we looking to have to cover our already spent cost? And so that's the part that is worrisome, because we have to fill the gaps. And so, you know, the hope is that we can go to the gas, you know, fill up our gas tanks, and we're spending less money there. So maybe we're going to spend more when we go grocery shopping, or when we go out to dinner, that sort of thing, to generate some of our economy. But we're not seeing a lot of that.
Well, and we also need to mention that there must be a balanced budget when you finish that session on, what is it, the 20th of the month. So there's an added pressure there. You know, one of the other things, and you alluded to it when you were talking about immigration, it's not just a New Mexico issue, it's a federal issue as well. And we're being confronted with some Medicaid increases that aren't just New Mexico's doing. It's part of the federal legislation and regulations. How is there a way to resolve that pending issue?
Well, when we look at Medicaid expansion, we're already looking at $80 million that is already taken up in our budget. And so when you look at our budget as a whole, and you have that, where does the new money fall? And you know, we have all these right now with mental health issues going on. You know, we've got all kinds of shortfalls within the state that we usually try to fill the gaps in. How are we going to fill those gaps if we don't have the funding? And that's where it becomes the real problem. And so that's why spending our dollars wisely is so important. And we need to make sure that we're not working in silos. We need to make sure that we are working with our community partners. We need to start working as a whole state and filling those gaps, because at the end we need to make sure that New Mexico kids are getting covered, New Mexicans are getting covered, you know, all of New Mexico. And that's where my true passion comes, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to be on appropriations, because let me tell you, it's grueling work. You look at numbers all day, and you hear people telling you how much they need money. And you know, sometimes you want to be doing bills that feel good or feel like you're actually doing something, instead of telling people that you can't give them the money. But we want to make sure, or at least I want to make sure, that I cover and that I get my constituents' needs met. And you know, for me, it's all in New Mexico, but I start with my constituents.
When you're talking about not having money, you start sounding a little bit like Senator John Arthur Smith as well. You know, okay, so oil revenues are down.
Yes.
And we know that isn't likely to be coming back quickly. So we have to look at some other source, and that immediately starts to focus on economic growth. And KRWG Simon Thompson has been doing some wonderful reporting on some of the very positive things going on and some of the problems with that. But you've got a couple programs, you've got LEDA funding, and do you see any way to spur that growth? And we've had some pretty good growth in southern Doña Ana County.
You know, I love LEDA. I can't say enough about LEDA, because I really think we need to start looking locally on how to do that. And so I think with some of those LEDA funds, we can really look at how locally we can grow our economy, because our economy here in southern New Mexico is so much different than northern New Mexico, and different projects for us, those extra dollars down here for us can really mean the difference between being able to sustain a business. And so I think as all the counties are starting to get together, they should all look at how they can bring LEDA into their counties and really utilize that, because I think that that's going to be what really saves us at the end.
And I think one of the concerns with any of the economic programs is oversight to make sure that the investments are going well and being handed out smartly.
And I think that goes in so many arenas when we talk about money. We were talking about different kinds of management and fiscal management. We have to spend our money wisely, and that is so important. And I think there's got to be some oversight, because as somebody who runs a nonprofit, I know I always have layers of oversight. We want to be able to do our jobs, but there needs to be somebody that's making sure you're doing it right, properly, and ethically.
A couple subjects that keep coming up in one form or another. One of them is reformation of bail bond laws in the state.
I think it starts off as a great idea, and have you read through that? It just, the first part of it says you're going to be able to keep criminals in jail. You're going to be able to. It talks really clearly about what the judge's rights are going to be and what the client's rights are going to be. But then the second portion of it basically says, but if you can't pay, you can get out anyway. Well, if it's somebody who, is a violent criminal, who's somebody who is probably going to jump bail, do we want to give them that option? And so I think it needs a lot of work. And I don't know if you read the Sun News today, but there was an article that it said it beautifully, and I should have probably made a copy of that, because it said the first part is great, but the second part really unties everything that you do in the first part. So we need to fix it. And we want to make sure that judges have an option to make some of those decisions. And we don't want violent criminals out on the street. We want to be, and I think bail bondsmen, they ensure that they're coming back. If you have to put your mom's house up as collateral, chances are you might come back. And so if there's not that, I don't know, I guess you want to say carrot or noose or whatever you want to say, there may not be that. And I think we need it. And I'm going to push hard to make sure that it's a good, complete law, not just pieces of it.
I'm going to deviate a little bit here to ask about the process, but I hope we also have an opportunity to open the door for some of the staff that's out there. You've asked several times, if you read the bill, the amount of paper and pages of legislation that's coming at you, and to be honest, this legislators have been meeting. I mean, I've been over to Hobbs and up to I mean, this isn't like this just happens in January. But again, the amount of information being thrown at you, how do you process this and make sure that what you're looking at is a good bill?
Well, you have to read the bill, and that's really important. And part of it is, so many times they can make these long documents the way you were talking about. And we are given staff during session.
Yeah.
I need to make sure that's clarified. During the session, and we do get analysis of what the bill is. And with me, I always look at the analysis, and I always look at what the impact to the budget is going to be. Mm-hmm. And once I look at that, then I can go back and look at the bill and say, okay, here's where this piece is. And sometimes the bills get very tricky, because that's what they do is, I think a lot of times they'll start off with a really great concept. And as a new legislator, the first time I walked in there with my bill, it was the best bill ever, I thought. Well, then people would start putting in amendments, and they'd start doing this, and after a while it wasn't your bill anymore. It wasn't the way you wanted it. So you really have to look at it, and it takes a lot of work. And so when people say, what do you do up there? Well, you're reading a lot, and you're studying, and you're trying to go through, because I think for you to be able to make those decisions, and if anything, I get that vote, and as a person who pushes that button for that vote, I feel like I have to really be representing what my constituents would want. And so that's why it's so important to really be knowledgeable of what it is. You know, and sitting in committee, you get to hear so many different you know, questions about the bill. And so especially when it comes to the money issues, I sit on appropriations, so I get to hear all that money, you know, information. So that's good, but you know, a lot of times if the bill doesn't concern money, I don't hear that. It goes to another committee. So it's an interesting process. And so we each sit on 2 committees. And you know, you try to glean as much information, you read a lot, and then you know, you get information from people that are up there trying to get that bill passed. And so it's important to hear from constituents. And I guess I'd like to say that now is that, you know, sometimes I can read a bill and I have my perception of it, but then somebody else can say, well, but this is what I think about it. And I'll go back and say, well, yeah, I could see that. So, you know, it's a process.
And it's part of what we always, I mean, we throw the word transparency around quite often without really thinking about it, but that is part of that transparency, is to have the process and make sure there's due process in the development of a bill.
Well, I will say this, it's not easy to pass a bill. You know, you go through several committees, you have to go through you know, questions, and you know, people will ask you questions, you'll be like, I never thought of it that way. And so it really makes you examine the bill. And so I think, you know, it's a real vetting process. And a lot of times bills don't get out the first time. You know, I was with in committee a couple weeks ago, and a fellow legislator says, oh, I've run that bill 10 times, and this year it's going to pass. You know, because he finally thinks he's got it down and tweaked and ready to go, because it's really taken that long.
Another one of those things that it always seems to be hovering, but I think is picking up some attention, is a curfew for teenagers. First of all, can you explain why and what we're talking about here?
I don't know if, you know, I guess because I'm not real sure that I agree with that bill, that I would be the best person to ask to explain the bill. For me, I have an 11-year-old son, and I think parenting starts at home. And I think I get concerned when I hear, you know, about curfew laws, because I know that kids should have rules, they should have boundaries, but I would hope that that would start at home. I know it's not happening, because as somebody who works with CYFD and the juvenile system, I've been to our current juvenile system recently to visit clients, and I know it's full. And so I know it's not happening. So I understand that we're trying to get a balance, but we need to be careful that we don't take parents' rights away. And I think we need to continue to support parents to be more educated, to know what their rights are, and maybe how to be better parents sometimes. And when those when those rules don't work and they do step into the juvenile system, you know, then that's a whole new process. But I guess I get concerned when I hear about curfew, because I think we're already so limited on what our law enforcement, their time is so valuable. And are we going to have them rounding up kids at curfew, or are we going to have them go out to somebody who's just been robbed or raped, or, you know, a violent crime has just happened? I don't want to take those resources away. And right now we are so limited on our resources. So it's a concern.
You know, I almost feel like we've come full circle here, because again, we started out talking about early childhood education and the role of parents, and here we are again dealing with what I don't want to say should be a parental issue, not a legislative issue, but there are concerns, legitimate concerns out there about it.
Well, and I think that's where I go back to when I was talking to you about my Shaken Baby bill, or we go back to, you know, certain types of pre-K bills. You know, part of that is getting parents involved. And so many times, you know, if you look at the state of New Mexico and what age kids sometimes start having kids, it's such a concern. But do they really know how to parent? And, you know, and that's a whole other discussion. But I think that we need to start really looking at getting that education to young parents, to any parent, and giving them the tools and the knowledge that they're going to need, because a lot of times they just don't know. And we need to, I truly believe that education is our way out of poverty. It's the way to really break barriers when it comes to, you know, early pregnancies. You know, it can really cure. I guess cure is a big word, but
Yeah.
it can really fix, I think, a lot of what we're dealing with here in New Mexico. And you know, when we look at our graduation rate, you know, that's low. We want to make sure that kids are ready for adulthood, and then to take on responsibilities as an adult. And we need to do a good job of that starting as parents.
We've got about a minute left, and you and I were talking about when I was going over questions and everything that you know, I looked at this, and a lot of these were on my list 10 years ago when we started your legislators, and ethics and campaign reform, and it became a little more of an issue with the Duran situation up there. Is there going to be a little more momentum very quickly to look into that?
I believe so. You know, I think that we're always looking at how to make that better. I think as lawmakers, people put us in positions, and we need to hold ourselves to the highest degree of what we're being asked to do. And you know, people make mistakes, and I think that we're all human and we're all flawed, but we also need to have a standard, and it needs to be a high standard, and I believe that.
I think what you've just described to me is a very, very, very busy agenda on a short session at Santa Fe. Representative Gallegos, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us, and we look forward to learning what you're able to accomplish and what you're working on during the session here that is just getting underway in Santa Fe. So again, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us as we have our 10th season of Your Legislators. Remember that programs like this are funded by support from viewers like you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to bringing you more information during the session from Santa Fe on Your Legislators.